December 7, 1941, did not just awaken America. It shattered balance. Pearl Harbor burned, but the real catastrophe unfolded silently afterward, across thousands of miles of ocean. In 6 months, Japan achieved what no modern empire had ever done. Hong Kong fell. Singapore collapsed. The Philippines were strangled. Dutch East Indies surrendered. Wake Island drowned in blood. Japan now controlled the resource heart of Southeast Asia: oil, rubber, minerals, everything needed to fight an industrial war. The Imperial Navy ruled the seas. The Imperial Army ruled the land. And America was unprepared, inexperienced, and desperately outmatched. Japan did not intend to invade the United States. It intended something far more dangerous. The strategy was simple: expand fast, dig deep, build a defensive perimeter so vast, so lethal, that America would negotiate rather than bleed for years to break it. Island chains became fortresses. Airfields became daggers pointed outward. The Pacific turned into a minefield of steel and aircraft. By mid-1942, the perimeter stretched from the Aleutians in the north to New Guinea in the south. And one thin line threatened everything America still held. Australia was not just an ally. It was a lifeline. From Australia, America could launch counteroffensives, move troops, build air power, control the southern Pacific. Japan understood this. If Australia could be isolated, not invaded, just cut off, the war would be functionally over. And that isolation required one thing: an airfield on Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal was a nightmare. Dense jungle, relentless rain, malaria-infested swamps, mountains that swallowed men whole. To Japanese planners, it was just another stepping stone. To American intelligence, it was a ticking bomb. In July 1942, reconnaissance photos confirmed the worst. Japan was building an airfield. Once operational, Japanese bombers could cut supply routes to Australia, threaten Allied shipping, extend Japan's defensive wall permanently. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, America faced a choice: wait or strike first. The U.S. military was not ready. Troops were green. Equipment was incomplete. Amphibious doctrine barely existed. But delay meant surrendering the Pacific Initiative forever. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz made the call. Against advice. Against risk assessments. Against the clock. America would attack Guadalcanal. It would be the first major Allied offensive of World War II. And failure was not an option, because there was no backup plan. The men chosen were the U.S. Marines. Most had never seen combat. Many had barely fired their weapons outside training grounds. They were sent with incomplete maps, limited intelligence, minimal air cover. Their mission: land on Guadalcanal, seize the airfield, hold no matter the cost. No one told them how close they would come to annihilation. On August 6, 1942, while an atomic shadow fell over Hiroshima far in the future, the invasion force moved silently through the Pacific. Transports creaked under the weight of men and machines. Destroyers cut dark water. Carriers launched fighters into uncertain skies. The Marines waited below deck, sweating, praying, writing letters they might never send. At dawn, the largest amphibious assault America had ever attempted would begin. And the Pacific War would change forever. August 7, 1942. The sun rose slowly over Guadalcanal, pale, humid, indifferent. For the men aboard the American transports, dawn brought no clarity. Only noise. Naval guns opened fire. Shells screamed overhead and vanished into jungle walls that swallowed explosions whole. Palm trees shattered. Smoke climbed upward, but no enemy fire answered back. That silence was unsettling. The Marines had trained for beaches turned into slaughterhouses. They expected machine guns, artillery, resistance. Instead, Guadalcanal greeted them with nothing. At 9 to 10 a.m., the first landing craft hit the shore. Boots met sand. Rifles came up. Men ran forward and realized something was wrong. There was no one there. The absence of resistance was not a blessing. It was a warning. Japanese forces on Guadalcanal were small, construction troops, engineers, labor units. Combat formations were elsewhere. They had not expected an American invasion. Not yet. So the Marines advanced inland cautiously, expecting ambushes that never came. Within hours, they reached their objective. The airfield. The Japanese airstrip was unfinished, bulldozers abandoned, fuel drums scattered, tents left behind. The Marines captured it almost intact. They renamed it Henderson Field, after Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at Midway. At that moment, Henderson Field became the most important piece of land in the Pacific. Whoever controlled it controlled the sky. Whoever controlled the sky controlled Guadalcanal. And whoever controlled Guadalcanal controlled the war's momentum. But the Marines didn't yet understand the trap they had stepped into. 2 days after the landing, disaster struck quietly, strategically. American carriers pulled away. Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, fearing Japanese counterattacks and low fuel levels, withdrew his carrier groups. Then came another blow. Transports began leaving before fully unloading supplies. The Marines watched from the shore as ships disappeared over the horizon, carrying food, ammunition, medicine, and hope. They were now stranded on a hostile island, surrounded by jungle, with minimal supplies, and a powerful enemy regrouping rapidly. Guadalcanal was no longer an invasion. It was a siege. Japanese headquarters reacted with disbelief. Guadalcanal was not supposed to be threatened, certainly not invaded. At first, commanders assumed the Americans would withdraw. They were wrong. As days passed, reconnaissance confirmed the nightmare. The airfield was operational. American aircraft were arriving. Japanese shipping was under threat. The decision was immediate. Guadalcanal must be retaken, no matter the cost. Japan could not move large convoys in daylight. Henderson Field made that impossible. So they adapted. Fast destroyers ran supplies and troops at night, high-speed dashes down the slot. Americans called it the Tokyo Express. It was daring. It was dangerous. And it brought wave after wave of Japanese soldiers onto the island. But it had limits. Destroyers could carry men, not heavy equipment. Not artillery. Not enough food. The Japanese were arriving, but they were starving. Guadalcanal was not neutral ground. The jungle attacked everyone. Malaria, dysentery, fungal infections, heat exhaustion. Men rotted from the inside out. Food was rationed brutally. A single can of rations might last a man an entire day or longer. The Marines began calling it the Green Hell. But worse than hunger was fear. The jungle hid everything. At night it came alive. On August 21, 1942, Japanese Colonel Keanu Ikiki led the first major counterattack. He believed American forces were weak. He believed shock and aggression would shatter them. He believed wrong. At the Tenaru River, Japanese troops charged headlong into prepared Marine defenses. Machine guns cut through the darkness. Artillery ripped formations apart. Flares illuminated scenes of absolute devastation. By dawn, Ikeki's unit was annihilated. The battlefield was littered with bodies. It was the first clear sign. This would not be an easy victory for Japan. Victory came with a cost. Marines were exhausted, sick, low on ammunition. Many had lost friends within weeks of landing. And yet the attacks kept coming. Japan was not finished. Not even close. Japanese artillery and aircraft targeted Henderson Field relentlessly. Runways were cratered by bombs. Aircraft burned on the ground. Pilots flew with barely patched machines. The pilots who flew from Henderson Field became legends. They were known as the Cactus Air Force, named after the American code name for Guadalcanal. They flew until planes fell apart. They flew sick. They flew hungry. And they kept the island alive. Every Japanese attempt to retake Henderson Field failed. Every night attack cost Japan trained soldiers it could not replace. America, for the first time, was learning how to fight this war. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but effectively. Guadalcanal was no longer just holding. It was bleeding Japan dry. By September 1942, Guadalcanal belonged to two wars. By day, American aircraft ruled the sky. By night, Japanese warships ruled the sea. Between Guadalcanal and the neighboring island of Savo lay a narrow stretch of water that would become infamous. The sailors would rename it later Iron Bottom Sound, because by the end, the sea floor would be paved with steel. The Imperial Japanese Navy had trained for night combat for decades. Its sailors could fight in darkness. Its commanders trusted instinct over radar. Its torpedoes were the most lethal in the world. The Type 93 Long Lance torpedo could travel farther, strike faster, hit harder. American sailors had nothing like it. And in 1942, American radar was still primitive, misunderstood, underused, mistrusted. The night belonged to Japan. The first major night battle came quickly. On the night of August 8-9, 1942, Japanese cruisers and destroyers slipped past Allied patrols. They struck with precision. In less than an hour, 4 Allied heavy cruisers were sunk. Over 1,000 sailors were killed. The invasion fleet was left exposed. It was one of the worst naval defeats in U.S. history. The survivors were stunned. America had seized the island, but lost control of the sea. After Savo Island, every night became a gamble. American sailors learned the hard way. Visibility was a weapon. Hesitation was fatal. Orders had to be instant. Ships collided in darkness. Torpedoes struck without warning. Men burned alive in fuel-soaked waters. Commanders made decisions in seconds that cost thousands of lives. There were no second chances at sea. Guadalcanal depended on supply. Japan raced to reinforce its troops. America raced to feed its Marines. Both sides risked everything in narrow waters. Convoys ran under constant threat. Destroyers fought at point-blank range. Cruisers became sacrificial shields. Every ship lost mattered. And Japan was losing more than ships. It was losing experienced crews. On October 11, 1942, American forces scored a rare night victory at the Battle of Cape Esperance. Radar-guided gunfire caught Japanese ships off guard. A cruiser was sunk. Others were damaged. For the first time, American sailors realized something crucial. Japan was not invincible at night. The learning curve was brutal, but it was working. The war reached its deadliest rhythm. Daylight, Henderson Field destroyed Japanese convoys. Night, Japanese ships bombarded Henderson Field. Battleships fired shells the size of small cars into the airfield. Runways vanished in fire. Aircraft were shredded. Pilots slept in foxholes. And each morning, somehow, Henderson Field reopened. In October 1942, the war expanded far beyond Guadalcanal's shores. Carrier fleets clashed at Santa Cruz. America lost ships. Japan lost pilots. And that loss mattered more. Japan could not replace veteran aviators. America could. The balance was shifting slowly, invisibly. By November, both sides prepared for decisive action. Japan planned a massive reinforcement effort, tens of thousands of troops. Battleships would neutralize Henderson Field. Transports would flood the island. America prepared to stop them at any cost. The stage was set for the bloodiest naval battle of the entire campaign. Perhaps the bloodiest of the war. November 12-13, 1942. American and Japanese ships collided in chaos. Ranges were so close guns could not depress low enough to fire. Destroyers fired torpedoes point-blank. Cruisers rammed enemies in darkness. Commanders died on bridges. Ships burned while still firing. By morning, the sea was choked with wreckage. Both sides suffered terrible losses. But Japan failed its mission. Henderson Field survived. The fighting did not stop. 2 nights later, battleships clashed again. This time, Japan lost irreplaceable capital ships. The sea floor filled with metal and bodies. Iron Bottom Sound was no longer a nickname. It was a grave. By mid-November, Japan's gamble had failed. Transports were sunk. Supplies were lost. Reinforcements drowned. Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal would now starve. The sea, once Japan's greatest strength, had become its greatest weakness. Guadalcanal was tightening its grip. After the naval battles of November 1942, something changed. Not in the headlines, not in official communiques, but on Guadalcanal itself. The Japanese attack slowed. The shelling grew weaker. The jungle, once alive with movement, began to feel empty. This was not peace. It was exhaustion. Both armies had reached the limits of human endurance, but only one still had a lifeline. For Japanese soldiers, hunger was no longer a threat. It was a certainty. The failed reinforcement convoys meant food would not arrive. Rice rations shrank to nothing. Men ate roots, leaves, insects. Some boiled leather. Some chewed bark. Some simply lay down and waited. American patrols began finding bodies with no wounds. Death by starvation. The Japanese army had never planned for defeat and had no doctrine for survival without supply. The jungle took its share from both sides. Malaria infected thousands. Dysentery drained strength daily. Fungal infections consumed skin and muscle. Hospitals overflowed. Medicine ran out. But American supply lines, fragile, delayed, imperfect, still existed. Japanese medicine did not. Fever hallucinations blurred reality. Men forgot orders. Some forgot who they were. Guadalcanal was dissolving armies from the inside. Guadalcanal did not allow large formations. Battles happened at 10 meters, 5 meters, sometimes closer. Enemies were sensed before they were seen. A snapped branch, a breath, a shadow. Soldiers slept with weapons in their hands. Night patrols vanished. Bodies decomposed where they fell, unrecoverable in the heat. The jungle erased evidence. And mercy. By December, Japanese units ceased functioning as armies. They became scattered groups, hungry, sick, desperate. Discipline weakened. Officers lost control. Some soldiers refused orders, unheard of in Imperial Japan. Others charged machine guns simply to end the suffering. American Marines noticed the change. The enemy still fought, but without hope. Victory was not painless. Marines were skeletal, eyes sunken, uniforms rotted. Men slept in mud, ate half rations, fought while sick. Letters home stopped. Guadalcanal changed them. They would carry the island with them for life. Something else happened. The jungle learned. American units adapted. Camouflage improved. Patrol tactics evolved. Defensive perimeters hardened. Marines learned to listen, to wait, to survive. The island no longer belonged to Japan. It belonged to those who endured. Tokyo still demanded victory. Orders arrived that could not be obeyed. Attack. Advance. Retake the airfield. There were no men left to do it. Commanders began to understand the truth. Guadalcanal was lost. The only question was whether anyone would survive to leave. December brought rain. Heavy, unrelenting. Gunfire faded. Small skirmishes replaced assaults. American forces advanced methodically, hill by hill, ravine by ravine. They found abandoned positions. Weapons without hands. The island was emptying itself of the enemy. In late December 1942, Japanese High Command made an unthinkable choice. Guadalcanal would be evacuated. The code name was Operation Key. It was not a retreat, at least not in words. But everyone knew the truth. Imperial Japan had never abandoned captured territory before. Guadalcanal would be the first, and it would not be the last. January 1943 arrived without ceremony. For the Japanese High Command, the decision had already been made, but it could never be spoken plainly. The word retreat did not exist in imperial doctrine. To abandon conquered ground was unthinkable. So they chose another word. Evacuation. Operation Key. A plan not to win Guadalcanal, but to save what remained of the army trapped there. Operation Key depended on deception. Japan needed the Americans to believe an attack was coming, not a withdrawal. Radio traffic increased. Dummy movements were staged. Orders spoke of renewed offensives. American intelligence intercepted the signals and misunderstood them. U.S. commanders believed Japan was preparing one final, desperate assault. They reinforced defenses. They waited. At night, Japanese destroyers returned to Iron Bottom Sound. But this time, they came not to deliver troops. They came to take them away. Under cover of darkness, starving soldiers were guided to the coast. Men who could barely walk were carried. Weapons were abandoned. Wounded were prioritized. The sea swallowed thousands, but thousands more escaped. American aircraft struck by day. American ships patrolled by night. Yet the evacuation continued. Japan could not simply disappear. Rearguard units were ordered to fight, to die if necessary, to buy time. They attacked American positions. They launched raids they could not win. These were not assaults for victory. They were sacrifices. American Marines faced fierce resistance, unaware they were fighting ghosts. Reports conflicted. Some patrols found abandoned camps. Others encountered sudden, violent resistance. The picture did not make sense. How could Japan be reinforcing and weakening at the same time? The answer would come too late. Operation Key extracted approximately 11,000 Japanese soldiers. But survival came at a price. Most were sick. Many were permanently disabled. Few would ever fight again. Guadalcanal had not just defeated an army. It had destroyed it. On February 7, 1943, the final evacuation completed. That night, American patrols advanced cautiously. No shots were fired. No movement detected. Guadalcanal was quiet. For the first time in 6 months, the island belonged entirely to the Allies. Only days later did American commanders fully grasp what had happened. Japan had escaped. But it did not matter. The strategic truth was unavoidable. Japan had lost the initiative and could never regain it. The Americans discovered the aftermath. Mass graves, abandoned weapons, evidence of starvation, entire units erased. The island told the story in silence. Guadalcanal was not a victory parade. It was a warning. With Guadalcanal secured, the path opened. New offensives followed. New islands fell. The Pacific War began moving in only one direction. Forward. Guadalcanal did not end the Pacific War. It ended something more important. It ended the illusion. For the first time since 1941, Imperial Japan had failed completely, publicly, and irreversibly. No new territory was gained. No strategic objective achieved. An entire campaign ended in abandonment. From this point forward, Japan would fight only to slow defeat. Guadalcanal became a brutal classroom. The United States learned lessons it could not have learned anywhere else. How to conduct amphibious warfare. How to integrate air, sea, and ground forces. How to fight a modern war across thousands of miles. Mistakes were paid for in blood. But those lessons would shape every victory that followed, from Tarawa to Okinawa. Japan entered Guadalcanal with some of its finest forces. It left without them. Veteran infantry, experienced naval crews, elite pilots. These were not replaceable. Japan's industrial system could build ships. It could not rebuild experience. The war would now be fought by younger, less trained men, against an enemy growing stronger every month. After Guadalcanal, American radar improved. Carrier doctrine evolved. Night fighting tactics advanced. The sea no longer favored Japan. The sky no longer feared it. Henderson Field had proven a new truth. Air power could dominate entire campaigns from a single strip of land. Perhaps the greatest change was invisible. Before Guadalcanal, Japan believed victory was inevitable. America feared endless defeat. After Guadalcanal, Japanese commanders spoke of survival. American planners spoke of timelines. Morale shifted. Confidence crossed the ocean. Guadalcanal created the template. Seize key islands. Build airfields. Cut supply lines. Force evacuation or annihilation. This strategy would dismantle the Japanese empire piece by piece. Not by conquering everything, but by starving it. The men who survived Guadalcanal were never the same. They carried scars, nightmares, experience. They would lead future battles, train new soldiers, and remember the island that taught them the cost of war. Guadalcanal revealed Japan's true enemy. Not American firepower, not industrial capacity. Time. America had it. Japan did not. Every month made the imbalance worse. Guadalcanal was where the clock turned against the empire. There was no parade for Guadalcanal. No single victory moment. Just a realization slowly understood, then accepted. The Pacific War had changed direction. Forever. Guadalcanal was not the biggest battle. Not the bloodiest, not the most famous, but it was the most important, because it was the moment when an empire stopped advancing and began to die. And because of one island, half forgotten in the Pacific, the outcome of World War II became inevitable.